Hello, thank you for joining me in my presentation. The title of my presentation is Vonnegut and Religion, Shogunai. My name is Camilo Omaña Villanueva. I'm a lecturer at Nagoya Women's University, and I'm also finishing up my first year as a doctoral student at Murray State. So I first need to explain what Shogunai means. I'm sure that many of you listening have no idea about the Japanese language. This is a word that's very interesting. It's also a word that I'm associating with Vonnegut and religion. So I'll explain that. I want to also talk about why does Vonnegut say we need a new religion? And I want to give my thoughts on ideology in general with some information from cultural anthropology. As many of you may know, Vonnegut studied anthropology, and I also studied anthropology. So I'd like to give some thoughts on theories of cultural evolution. In addition, I'm going to talk about what Vonnegut means when he says, "so it goes." And this is going to relate to Shogunai. And I want to very, very briefly talk about Japanese religion or philosophy, and try to find some examples of Vonnegut's philosophy intersecting with Japanese philosophy. Okay. So what is Shogunai? Like any intelligent person looking for an answer, I asked Google. And you can see here, Shogunai comes up, it cannot be helped. And this is a very typical definition translation. If you use a dictionary, you may see this is translated this way, but there are many things in Japanese culture that cannot be directly translated into English. And Shogunai is one of these words. It's actually ranked as one of the key words, or it's considered one of the key words that define Japanese culture. And it can be considered as accepting your fate. So for example, if there is a natural disaster, you need to get over it quickly, Shogunai. This can be a good thing. The natural disaster is not a good thing, but being able to recover quickly, the way this word is used. Other times it can be a bad thing. For example, there are many terrible politicians. You don't know who to vote for. So you just don't vote, Shogunai. This is not a good thing. So the connection is to Vonnegut's famous book, Slaughterhouse 5. And there's a passage here I want to read to you about an uneventful night in a Dresden prison camp. It's a very short passage. Nothing happened that night. It was the next night that about 130,000 people in Dresden would die. So it goes. So this is one of the many instances, one of the many refrains that appears after the mention of death in Slaughterhouse 5. Vonnegut's source for the number of dead was actually wrong. His book was published in 1969. It had been in the works for decades, I think maybe 20 years. The source he got the number from, that person actually changed the number in 1966. Irving changed it to 25,000. But still, Vonnegut's experience of those bombings was very similar to what happened in Japan. The firebombing of Tokyo, for example. Most of the major cities, except for Kyoto, were either firebombed and, of course, atomic bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And these appear, the war and the bombings are a recurring theme in Vonnegut's work. There's also a language link, and that's Shogunai. And I believe it's so it goes. One of the questions I have is why Vonnegut felt that the world needs a new religion. You know, I live in Japan, and I'm an English teacher. I'm not a literary scholar, but I want to take a stab at it. So it goes means that all the world has gone to poop and nothing can be done to fix it. So this is, when I first read the book 20 years ago, uh, all the world has gone to poop and nothing can be done to fix it. So it goes. There's nothing after death, right? Especially if you're Kurt Vonnegut. Vonnegut, I believe, was an atheist. He, he talks about God, but doesn't mean he actually believes in God. So there's nothing, that's final. Death is final. So it can't be fixed. So what does this phrase actually mean to Vonnegut? And I think that I had it all wrong 20 years ago. This is my actual copy of Palm Sunday. I remember when I was a kid, my introduction to Kurt Vonnegut was in a movie with Rodney Dangerfield, who was playing a rich guy who went back to school, and he's a terrible student, and he pays someone to write his paper on Kurt Vonnegut, and it turns out it's Kurt Vonnegut that he pays to write the paper, and the teacher catches on and says, "There's no way that you wrote this paper, and by the way, whoever wrote this paper has no idea about Kurt Vonnegut." So Rodney Dangerfield's character calls up Kurt Vonnegut to cuss him out, but before he can do so, Vonnegut cusses him out. It's a great scene, and that was my introduction to Kurt Vonnegut back in 1986 when I was 16 years old. This copy of Palm Sunday was given to me by my friend Josh. He was a philosophy major, turned English teacher, turned defense lawyer. He left Japan in 2008 and gave me this relic. And I've had this in my possession for over 10 years, and I broke it out for this conference. Palm Sunday is a collection of essays and anecdotes and commencement speeches. This quote comes from Palm Sunday, from a chapter on religion. And the chapter on religion is sandwiched between a chapter on embarrassment and one on obscenity. So I wonder what Vonnegut was trying to say. I suggest we need a new religion. If suggesting that we need a new religion is sacrilege, then the Emperor Constantine was guilty of sacrilege, and the Emperor Nero was an admirably pious man. He goes on to say that this passage, and if I've offended anyone here by talking of the need of a new religion, I apologize. I'm willing to drop the word religion and substitute it for these three words: heartfelt moral code. I think I'm getting close to what Vonnegut means when he talks about having a new religion, and what he means when he says, "So it goes." He's saying that he wants people to be nice to each other with a heartfelt moral code. He's not really talking about religion. He's talking about a life philosophy, another kind of ideology. So I want to diverge a little bit and talk about what ideology means. And I think Vonnegut would appreciate it because it comes from anthropology. So Vonnegut attended the University of Chicago as a student from 1947 to 1949, and he should have gotten his master's in anthropology, but it was rejected. His thesis was called "The Fluctuations Between Good and Evil in Simple Tasks." It was famously rejected by the University of Chicago. He would eventually get that degree with the book Cat's Cradle. Vonnegut wanted to go to Harvard. He wanted to teach at Harvard, and Harvard wanted him to have a master's. So he went back. He convinced the faculty to give him the degree. What's interesting is 20 years before Vonnegut was there, Leslie White graduated. And Leslie White was a very famous cultural anthropologist. And he had his kind of controversial theories on cultural evolution. One of his ideas, which I took from Dr. Peter Brown, this was about 25 years ago from Emory, where I attended as an undergrad in anthropology. And this is a very simplified version of White's theory of cultural evolution. And it's called the layer cake model. And I want to break this out because it gives us some insight into what ideology means and possibly what Vonnegut could have been thinking of when he talked about religion and God. In order to understand why cultures are different, we must understand that cultures change. So there are three layers to this cake, with the environment at the base. Technology is the first layer of the cake. So the bottom is the environment. That is just the base of the cake. So the first layer of the cake is technology, and that's any kind of tools, whatever we use to get resources from the environment. The next layer of the cake is social organization. These is the elements of culture that we're all familiar with, how we marry, who we marry, our behavior, manners, all these things in culture that relate to how we interact with people in our society. And at the top is our belief system. I just put ideology here. You could put God, you could put religion, you could put life philosophy, you could put political ideology, demigods, whatever you want to put. So what's interesting is as masses of people, we tend to think that God dictates everything. So, God tells me who I should marry, what I should marry. God controls the environment. Pandemics happen. It's because of God. So this is a very dangerous thinking, but it is a very common way the societies think. And we come from, as Vonnegut mentions throughout his work, in his lectures, we're kind of attuned as people to be parts of tribes, 40 to 50 people in a group. And, we have our belief system. And as an anthropologist, I'm pretty sure Vonnegut learned at the University of Chicago to look the opposite direction. Instead of, getting our ideas from God, we kind of have invented God. And you do see this recurring theme in Vonnegut's work when he talks about God. This is Vonnegut, the anthropologist, in his work. And it starts with the environment. Of course, there's a great danger in this model, but just looking at it through a cultural lens, that this is how culture changes. We can see how it all starts with the environment. A perfect example is with COVID-19. This virus happened and it altered, how we use technology, how we interact with people. And I'm pretty sure that in the near future, our beliefs will change. So that's all I want to talk about with ideology. So going back to So It Goes, what does Vonnegut mean? Looking back at the chapter in Palm Sunday, the chapter on religion, Vonnegut mentions that knowledge has poisoned us. He says that we'd better make the best of a bad situation. And I think that's where it's at. I think that's what Shogunai means. And I think that's what Vonnegut means with So It Goes. We'd better make the best of a bad situation. Regarding religion in Japan, I want to talk very briefly. There are just 4 important religions here. The Ainu were animist, and animist believing that God can be found in everything. It influenced Shinto, and Shintoism is very similar, where they Japanese believe that there's gods all around us. Have you seen Spirited Away? You can see the onsen, the sento, the bath where all the gods come. This is a very common belief in Japanese culture. As I mentioned, Fuji is a god. Buddhism came from China, and Christianity, of course, started in Nagasaki, and it was banned for 250 years. There's still Christians that survived in Nagasaki, and Christianity is spreading. But for the most part, Japanese don't really see themselves, even though they go to temples, they go to shrines, Japanese don't see themselves as being religious. In fact, they might tell you that they're atheist more than anything else. For them, religion is more of a philosophy of life. And it's very similar to what Vonnegut is referring to when he talks about a heartfelt moral code. It's interesting, the word heartfelt means in Japanese, it's called heartful. And this is a book, Sirens of Titan, a Japanese title. In his letters, Vonnegut's first visit to Japan was in spring 1984. And it was too bad because it was just after the cherry blossom season. So whoever planned Vonnegut's schedule got it all wrong. They should have brought him here sooner. In his letters, he mentions that he came here and he didn't really do much. He did some sightseeing. I think he stayed for 2 weeks. There's really not much mention of Japan after that. So I don't really think Japan influenced Vonnegut at all. And especially since he came here in 1984, his major works had already been written. But it's interesting how Vonnegut's heartfelt moral code is very similar to Japanese philosophy of life. So I did notice what's interesting is the word bokon in Japanese means departed soul. As many of you know, in Cat's Cradle, the bokonon, it's just an interesting connection. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Also, the word karas, you can that sounds like a word in Japanese, which means crow. Going back to bokonon and the karas are the teams of people, the doers of God's will. And it sounds very similar to Japanese teams, where the group is more important than the individual. Also, Vonnegut talks a lot about Hiroshima and Nagasaki throughout his work. In Cat's Cradle, at the beginning of the work, he mentions that Hiroshima bombing inspires an unfinished book called The Day the World Ended. In Timequake, Vonnegut describes getting fire from Prometheus to incinerate the two cities, Nagasaki, Hiroshima. He also mentions in Timequake an anecdote of William Styron, who said that Hiroshima saved his life. Styron was supposed to invade Japan, but when they bombed Hiroshima, he didn't have to. Vonnegut's retort was that there's a, let me read this passage. There's a single word that proved our democratic government was capable of committing obscene, gleefully rabid, racist, daoistic murders of unarmed men, women, children, murders devoid of military common sense. Vonnegut said that word was Nagasaki. In the Sirens of Titan, there's a Japanese flag. It's shown with a few others to signify that it would be one of the first countries attacked by the Martians. But the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these don't really have anything to do with religion, but in a way that they do. And it comes back to the word Shogunai. I mentioned Google translation, it cannot be helped. This word, Shogunai, has helped the Japanese people. The philosophy of it helped them rebuild after World War II. It helped them rebound after the tsunami on March 11, 2011. This word tells the individual to surrender their thoughts, their ideas, and let the group have a chance to speak. And Shogunai is never a word that is spoken hastily. It's a word that is used after much reflection, and it's often used with others. Yeah, so when all courses of action have been exhausted, when all that's left is up to the individual to endure some act of hardship, and when God's graces have, for some reason, been skipped, you're all alone, Shogunai. And this is what I think Vonnegut means with "so it goes." So make the best of a bad situation, Shogunai. And I propose that we use the word in English, Shogunai, or we use Vonnegut's word phrase, we change it to one word, and we say "so it goes." So anytime we need to make the best of a bad situation, so it goes. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And these are my references.